Hi and welcome to the Couchlit Book Club. I'm Lauren and today I'm joined by a very special guest. Now if you keep up with us over on our Instagram, you'll know that Layna has been exploring the US for the past month. So, kindly stepping in today is Lewis.
Hello!
Now many of you will know him as my boyfriend. Others may know him as a movie lover, teacher and a notorious non-reader.
I don't read. I don't.
But why? Aren't you a English teacher?
I did, but I burnt myself out at university. I spent too much. I was a pretty big reader before I kind of got to university, and then I was just spent all my time reading educational theory, and then that just burnt me out, and I couldn't read anything else after that.
No, I think that's really common though, and I think I've had the same experience, and I think that's also why me and Layna Layna and I decided to start this podcast, is because, yeah, uni kind of does kill your brain cells a little bit, and it makes you hate reading, especially reading for fun.
You read 4 pages of educational theory, you're not itching to get into another book after that.
No, definitely not. And also when you come home from like a long day working, you've just started full-time work, the last thing you want to do is come home and read more. But I've definitely out of that space now, obviously, but we'll get you there.
I'd like to get back into it. I've thought about it a lot, and there's a lot of books that I hear about that the story sounds really interesting, but I just never really bring myself to doing it. I think I just need to reintegrate back into the hobby again.
I think you need to read one of those books that's, everyone classifies as, oh my god, this got me back into reading. You need one of those.
I should listen to your episode on podcast about reading slumps and...
You really should. But anyway, the fact that Lewis doesn't really read actually fits in quite well for today's episode, as we'll actually be analysing book-to-movie adaptations. And as I said earlier, Lewis is a big movie lover, so am I. So we're really keen to chat today about some of our favourite books, movies, and what makes a good adaptation, and some of our most disappointing adaptations.
I'm very excited.
Excellent. But before we get into the episode, I do want to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land in which we're recording on. So the Kabi Kabi and Jinnabara peoples of the Sunshine Coast, we're actually on vacation, on holiday at the moment, so we're not in our usual Brisbane Meanjin spot today. Sovereignty has never been ceded. It always was and always will be Aboriginal land. Thank you guys so much for listening. Let's get into this.
Oh, and also before we get going, happy birthday, Lauren!
Ah, so true. Thank you so much. Birthday holiday, birthday podcast.
Let's get into it.
Let's get into it. Like I said, book-to-film adaptations are extremely common, and often they're super successful, which is also why they're so common. Producers know they can use the popularity of a book to market the film's release, and they're going to make a shit ton of dollary dues in turn. Now, some of the most recent examples of book-to-film adaptations include It Ends With Us by Colleen Hoover, which if you are a regular listener of the pod, you will know that we are kind of haters over here. But that was super popular and it got, a shit ton of dollary dues. Where the Crawdads Sing by Delia Owens is one of my favourite books. It was turned into a film a few years ago, which, is one of those examples that I was kind of disappointed by. And then we also have Killers of the Flower Moon, which I think maybe is less known as being a book-to-movie adaptation.
Yeah, I didn't even know this was a book until I was watching the credits of the movie and it said based on a book. But that was cleaned out at the Academy Awards last year.
And then some classics that you'll definitely know of is To Kill a Mockingbird, back from the 1960s. I will say that a book we'll be talking about later, Jasper Jones, another book I've also spoken about on the pod, is basically what I would describe as the Australian version of To Kill a Mockingbird. It's also a book-to-movie adaptation. But some other classics, we have majority of Shakespeare's work. I guess that's more plays than it is books, but I'd still count that in here.
Yeah.
And then also, Harry Potter,
all your big hitters, all your big YA hitters.
Yeah, a lot of YA. I think that could be a whole other podcast episode just talking about YA, the book to film adaptations.
There was a whole moment in the 2000s and 2010s that was all that was being made. You just had the Maze Runner, Hunger Games, Twilight,
was
Harry
Maze
Potter.
Runner a book?
Yeah, Maze Runner was a book.
Divergent?
Yeah. Maze Runner and Divergent, yeah. Maze Runner arguably ended the YA.
Because it was crap.
The last Maze Runner came out. It had been delayed by about 2 years. And then when it finally came out, no one watched it, and that kind of signaled to studios that maybe we needed to pivot to something else because YA isn't really printing us money anymore.
Well, I guess something has to be the catalyst.
Yeah, exactly. Hopefully we get there with superhero movies sooner rather than later.
True. Anyway, Lewis, what do you think makes for a good book-to-film adaptation?
Well, as the big reader that I am, I am a big...
sorry.
Yeah.
Just don't cut yourself short. I think you've read more than you're making out.
Yeah, no. To clarify, I was a massive reader when I was younger. Read a lot, and it's in my early 20s where I've definitely dropped off on that front. But the one when I was younger, and I was watching a lot of adaptations of books that I really liked, I'm a big believer in some changes to the source material. I don't want a beat-for-beat replay of what I've already read. If I want that, I'll read it again. I like things that get changed a little bit, things that get tweaked. No massive changes. I don't want a whole new character or a long-lost brother being introduced who was never there in the first place.
Yeah.
But I do like it when they make some small changes, either whether that's to service the change in format from book to movie, or whether or not that's just to make the story flow a little bit easier in a 2.5 hour runtime. Because you don't have nearly as much time to work with in a feature film as you do in something like a book.
I think I definitely agree with you. I think that is quite an unpopular opinion though, especially among book lovers, because you do become quite emotionally attached to the book and the exact elements of it, and also the author's work. But considering I'm also a film lover as well, I'm like, feel like I have a bit of a balance. But I think then there's a whole other conversation about book to TV, because again, it's a different format altogether. You have a longer period to play with. With a movie, yeah, you've got that 2 hour runtime. With TV, you have a lot more space to play with there. So
I do think as time's gone on and as we're in this golden era of television now, I think that books being adapted into TV shows is becoming the new norm, because you do have so much more room to not have to cut stuff out. You know, we've got the new Harry Potter TV show coming out.
But also, this isn't always for the best. Sometimes they're just reaming it for all that it's worth.
Yeah. Sometimes it's just they're just throwing it all out there just to keep the fans happy and hopefully print some money. But I don't necessarily know if that always equals into a great movie. It depends if you want to have a good... Because there's a difference between a great adaptation. That might be different to what a great movie looks like.
Well, that's what I was going to say. What I think makes for a good film adaptation is ensuring you have a good script. I think that goes for any movie. But I think when it comes to book to film, you can't make that mistake of just reading the dialogue from the book and then putting it into the movie. Like, you actually need to really tweak that script, because it's a different format completely. You need to actually tweak the script to make sure it's engaging and cohesive for a visual and snappier format. So I think that's really important. What else do you think? It's kind of hard off the bat. I think when you watch movies, you can see, oh, that's a terrible thing, you shouldn't do that, you shouldn't do this. And I think we'll get into that when we talk about some examples of movies later.
Hindsight's always 20/20 as well. You can always watch the movie afterwards and be like, oh, that didn't work in the adaptation, but that might not have necessarily been clear during the process of writing the script or making the movie. It might have seemed like a really good idea. Then when everything was done, you got into the editing room, all of a sudden you realise the changes you made actually kind of upset certain things. And as long as those changes, we've spoken about this before, as long as those changes don't upset the kind of general themes of the story, the core messaging, and all that stuff still stays intact, that's usually what I care about.
I think that's a key thing. Do what you want, creative license to make it work. Especially, you want it to be in the director's style as well. So I think as the core messaging remains the same. There is one movie that I want to bring up right now in line with that, which is The Great Gatsby. So, book to film, and Baz Luhrmann directed it, and arguably on paper, Baz Luhrmann should be the person to direct that movie. But when it actually happened, it kind of just missed the key messaging. Like, it was all show and performance, which is what he's really good at, but it's like he missed that soul of the movie. Or soul of the book, I mean. The sole purpose. Do you know what I mean?
I have read Great Gatsby, and I've watched Great Gatsby. I read it in high school.
Woohoo.
So I can speak with some authority on this. I do feel like I agree. There's two basic adaptations of Great Gatsby. There's the version with Robert Redford in it, and there's the Baz Luhrmann version.
I've only watched the Baz Luhrmann version.
I watched half the Robert Redford version for English class, and I was sick the day when they finished it. But it was alright. I do think that the Baz Luhrmann director choice was probably made because they really wanted this, to show the excess of wealth in this era, and it was new money versus old money is kind of the entire plot of that book, and those two forces kind of coming to a head and conflicting with each other. But Baz Luhrmann seemed more interested in getting a fun flappers cover of Beyonce's Crazy in Love and making that as part of the big party scene, which is a great scene, and it's really cool, and the big reveal of Leonardo DiCaprio as Gatsby, and that whole sequence is really well directed, but then everything after that feels almost like an afterthought. Like he really had the first 20 minutes of the movie planned out and how it was going to go, and then after that, he kind of just forgot what he was doing and had to try and make it interesting again.
Yeah, but in saying this, it's all fun and games for us to sit here and critique. We've never made a movie, never read a book, but also we're consumers, so we're allowed to have an opinion.
Also, I will say, I haven't watched the Great Gatsby movie since high school, so maybe my perspectives on it could be different now. I've grown to appreciate Baz Luhrmann a lot more as I've gotten older as a director, so that would be one I'd be interested in revisiting to see if I still have the same opinions.
Yeah, I don't think it's a bad movie. I used to really like it when I was younger, but I still think it was lacking kind of really core intention.
Yeah.
Anyway, now we're going to get into this fun new round. We've never done this before on the podcast. This is just a special that we have Lewis on as a guest. We're going to be doing a quick fire round of some book to film adaptations, asking, has Lewis read this?
And the answer will probably be no.
No, I think the first one you've read. Okay. So, Jasper Jones by Craig Silvey, 2009 book. It was adapted into a film by Rachel Perkins in 2017.
Jasper Jones is probably my favourite book I've ever read. So I went into this with pretty high expectations. I love the story. That was I went through another reading slump, like in the middle of high school, and Jasper Jones was actually the book that got me out of that and got me back into reading again.
I don't do that.
I've been reading a lot of kind of soldiery action, treasure huntery stuff, your Dan Browns, your Matthew Rileys, all that kind of stuff. Was getting a bit bored of it, and then kind of a book with a good bit of, no guns involved. It was nice to read a good human story.
Yeah, a coming-of-age Aussie.
Yeah, with a mystery element behind it.
Has heart to it.
Yes. I actually watched this movie at a premiere and watched a Q&A with the producer when it first came out. And it was interesting hearing him talking about how they were really, really wanted to keep it as close to the original source material as they could.
And I think they achieved that.
And I think they have achieved that really well. I would argue almost to a fault. To some capacity, I felt like because they tried so hard to keep it in line with the book, it limited them a lot. And the book felt like a much deeper and better exploration of the themes than the movie ever did. The movie felt much more driven by the plot of the book, whereas the book had the same plot but had more stuff on the outside of it, like my favourite scene in the movie and one of my favourite scenes in the book is the cricket scene when I can't remember his friend's name. But he pulls his full century at the cricket match and he wins over all the cricket boys. It's one of my favourite scenes in the book, and it's described so vividly in the book, and you can trace it the entire time. And then you kind of get to the movie, and it's kind of just executed in this montage. It's all kind of over in like 45 seconds, and I remember being kind of really disappointed with that. I remember there's also a key scene with that family because the timeline's kind of aligned with the Vietnam War, and his close friend, their family of Vietnamese immigrants, and they have quite a bad... It's a hate crime, we'll just call it what it is. These people come and rough up their yard and try to assault his father. That scene, I felt like, didn't really get the breathing room it probably could have deserved. I felt like it got rushed through a bit. I felt like there were some reveals that were rushed through. Product of it being a feature film and being quite,
And also, another thing I picked up in the book, I remember reading that and actually laughing out loud and smiling like ear to ear from some of the conversations between like the children characters, because they were so accurate to how you hear or how you spoke as a child, and they were so like full of life and like they were so realistic and funny, but then they just like weren't really translated well into the visual movie form, which I thought was disappointing, because that again, it adds, what I keep saying is that added so much heart to it, especially
for us as like two people who did grow up in small, more rural towns, like me in northern New South Wales and you in like far north Queensland. Those character dynamics feel like our childhood, so then when they're kind of not really executed in the best way in the movie, you feel it.
And to me, those character dynamics are what makes life fun when you're a child. Like, that's what you have. You have your imagination, you have your friendships. You're working with what you've got when you live in a small town. You have minimal resources, so you're working with your brains. And the
Make
kids,
your own fun.
You're so creative and fun, and I just think that was kind of missed out on in the movie. But it's still not a bad movie. I think it's still worth a watch.
I think a great book with a good adaptation. I think it's a good, hearty adaptation. But my recommendation would always be to people to read the book first.
Yeah, I could speak about this book forever. Okay, number 2. We have one of my favourite movies from when I was a teenager. Perks of Being a Wallflower by Stephen Chbosky from 1999. It was also directed by Stephen Chbosky, but over 10 years later in 2012.
I've watched the movie. I haven't read the book.
Yeah.
Now, this isn't usually a kind of movie that I would always be super interested in watching. But as I've gotten a bit older and my taste kind of broadened a bit, I decided to kind of give it a go. And I thought as far as coming of age movies went, it was very, very good.
I will say, it's of its era. It's 2012. It's very Tumblr adjacent. It's a bit cringe at times. But...
Oh, Emma Watson in the back of that pickup truck. I can't take that seriously.
Oh my god, have you heard this song? What's this song? Oh my god.
A bunch of teenagers.
It's not just David Bowie.
Oh god, yeah. You're the first person to discover David Bowie.
Good on you, Emma Watson. But...
Queen of the book-to-movie adaptation, apparently. Perks of Warfare and Harry Potter. And Little Women.
Yeah, go Emma. Anyway, I think the book is very over time. It is really cringe, but... I think at that time, it was really different for what coming-of-age movies were coming out. Like, you had... Everything else was a bit more explicit, a bit party-y, or completely opposite direction, like really juvenile. This felt like it was really nice, balanced, soft in between. It was a nice gateway to kind of that coming-of-age adolescent, getting out of the adolescent stage kind of movie. And a different kind of high school protagonist. I feel like we often feel like the same... It's either nerd or bully. It's either nerd, bully, or jock, kind of like your main three. The kind of person who is just unknown within their school. A wallflower, if you will. A wallflower, if you will. Is an interesting perspective to take. And I like the way that, is it Charlie? Is that the main character's name? I like the way that Charlie develops as well over the course of the movie. And like, you see him getting into a relationship with a girl who doesn't really like that much. He likes someone else who he doesn't because he thinks it's what the group wants. And that idea of like finding that community and that sense of self, I think, is a powerful message, especially for young people who maybe don't feel like they have that at that time in their life, and maybe it is a nice story for them to see that makes them feel like, just because I maybe am not the most popular person in my year 10 cohort, my life will get better. And also I think it's, if you, especially, again, coming back to the living in a small town thing, like, sometimes if you don't have one of the three popular interests, you feel like, well, either I have to fake it or I just have to suck it up and be ostracized. But this was kind of a nice reminder that, no, you can have your own interests and just be and exist, and it was kind of a beautiful message. But also, shout out to Ponytail Derek, who also plays Greg in Succession. Look how far he's come. And glowing Zack in Sky High. Look at him. As for it being a book-to-movie adaptation, I think because Stephen Chbosky was the writer of the book and then the director of a movie, that played a really good and helpful hand in the process. I think that's one of those ones that I would actually be interested in watching that again. Some parts of the core cast have aged poorly. They shall not be named. And after watching them in that terrible Marvel Flash movie that I went and watched, I don't think I can watch anything with them in anymore. I will say, the relationship that they have with the football player in the movie, I think is really, really well executed, really well done. And I remember that scene where they're having, I think it was an argument or a fight they have at an event or a party. Yes. I remember that scene really making an impact on me. I completely forgot about that dynamic, but that's the thing. I could talk about this book and movie for hours as well, because it's one of those stories where, there's the main character and it's about his relationship with himself and coming of age, blah, 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 the people around him. But then there's also all the side characters are fleshed out so well, and I would argue in the book and the movie. Like May, the girl he dated, Emma Watson's character, like, it's just all fleshed out so well. Every character's really vivid, even Ponytail Derek. And the movie does a good job of doing that too, as like along with the book, like developing all those characters. Like, I do feel like you get good time with every character. Yeah, they do a really good job of showing their group dynamics, but also Charlie's individual relationships with each of them, and how that's kind of, and how he's taking bits of each of them on to kind of help himself and like develop his own personality and his sense of self. Yeah. I think if I was to have a child, I would give them that book when they were a teenager to read. That's a great one. Yeah. Okay, number 3, Wolf of Wall Street by the infamous Jordan Belfort from 2007. Then it was directed by Martin Scorsese in 2014. You read? Haven't read, have watched multiple times. Yeah. This is one of the only 3-hour movies that I can stomach, and it feels like it shoots by in 90 minutes. It's really good. Yeah, this is a really good example of a movie with a movie that doesn't really cut a lot out, but its script is really good at keeping the key bits in and moving this thing along at a lightning pace. I think one thing I do want to mention about this book is that if you aren't familiar with Jordan Belfort, like, his whole story is about him scamming his way into Wall Street and ripping a bunch of people off. Like, he's a terrible person. He went to prison for it, and he wrote this book in prison. So it is interesting that we're giving this much screen time to a criminal, but at the end of the day, Scorsese's film isn't meant to be glorifying him. It is making fun of the whole scene.
Arguably, I feel like is the key difference between the book and the movie. The movie, because it's not written by the man who actually committed all these acts, can afford to be a bit more impartial, make a little bit more of a judgment call on the ethicality of these actions. Because when you listen, I've never read the book, but I've seen interviews with Jordan Belfort, and I've seen him talk on podcasts and stuff. And he is a fascinating character. You can understand how he managed to get away with doing all he did because the way he speaks is very charismatic. But to have Scorsese make the movie, Jordan Belfort didn't have heaps to do with the movie. He had some to do with it, and he does pop up at the very end as a guy who's introducing Leonardo DiCaprio at a sales conference. It's also worth noting that since the movie, since Jordan Belfort's gone to prison, there have been other allegations and other dodgy business practices that have been going on for a little while.
Well, I mean, if there's one big one, there's bound to be more.
There's smoke, there's fire.
Yeah, exactly.
But yes, I would say the big thing for me with this one is that I would argue here that the movie is almost the best way of consuming this content, because you kind of get to do it in such a way that you're able to kind of have a more impartial look at the events and what happened.
I used to own the book, and I read it when I was a teenager, like maybe 17, I read it. And after reading it, I was like, this is a really great story. But I feel kind of icky about owning the book because he wrote it. And I don't own the book anymore. And I still think it's a kind of odd one. Like, I think it's a great story to tell. And we're going to keep telling these stories of these white-collar criminals who really only got a nip on the chin, like, as a
He even says that at the end of the movie where he went to prison, and the prison is not that he gets to play tennis for 3 years and live in some lovely little minimum security prison.
Yeah. I don't know. Again, I could talk about this for hours. It's really fascinating, but lots of nuances involved in this one. But I think, again, if you're going to engage with this one, watch the movie. You'll definitely get a more unbiased perspective.
Also, in my opinion, it is one of Martin Scorsese's best movies. It's one of the best movies by, and I know this thing's been beaten to death and I don't want to be that guy. Yeah. He is one of the great directors. He is one of the guys who's made a career of making great stuff, and this is a high watermark. We've already mentioned him twice in this episode. That's a very good point, yes.
But also, Margot Robbie's in it, guys. This movie is what got her famous outside of Neighbours, I would say. Like, this was her big Hollywood break.
Yeah.
So, if you haven't watched this movie, which I'm assuming everyone has, but if you haven't, watch that movie.
Don't let the runtime scare you, people. It's a good time.
It flies by. Okay, and our last one in the quickfire round, which has actually not been so quick, Hunger Games by Suzanne Collins, which was released in 2008.
I have opinions on this.
Oh, don't we all? And then directed by Gary Ross in 2012. Now, have you read the book?
I've read all 3 books.
Wow.
Read them all when I was quite a bit younger.
I've only read the first one, and I only read it in school, for school. I was very disengaged from this whole dystopian YA theme. I don't know why, I just was. But I've read the first one in school, and I actually really liked it.
Look, if anyone here who watches movies, you'll know it's a remake of Battle Royale, the classic Japanese action horror thriller movie, which is also fantastic if no one's watched that.
I haven't watched that.
That's fantastic.
You say horror and I shiver.
It's not really horror, it's more of a thriller.
Okay.
It's a dystopian future. A bunch of school kids from a bunch of different fancy private schools get abducted and put on an island where they all have to kill each other as the last one standing. First of all, the first Hunger Games, as far as an adaptation of the book goes, pretty good. Cannot deal with a shaky cam. When you have 4 characters, Katniss looks the same as the girl from District 2, and Peter looks the same as the boy from District 2.
And you can't just...
And there are 2 moments. There's a moment when Katniss is fighting the girl. They both have a brown braided ponytail with the same coloured jacket, and they both have the same skin tone, same as Peter and the other guy they fight at the end. And for the life of me, I watched this movie maybe 2-3 months ago with some of my students in class, and I could not tell you who was winning. Who was who and during the fights, because the cameras is going all over the place.
Interesting.
This series also has my pet peeve with books and movie adaptations, which is the Part 1-2 finale.
Oh.
Now, I don't have a problem with a Part 1-2 finale if it is warranted. In the case of something like Harry Potter, I understand. Even in the case of something like Twilight, to some capacity, I do understand. I've never read the last Twilight, and I think that first Twilight Part 1 is really boring. What I don't like for a Part 1 is for Part 1 to feel like a 2.5 hour lead up to Part 2. I want a movie. I'm not paying $15 in this inflation-ridden time.
That's how I felt with June. But I'm not a very big sci-fi girl anyway, but I felt like June Part 1 was like a big, massive, long movie trailer or video film clip. only few things happened.
Well, I actually inclined to agree because I much prefer Dune Part 2 to Dune Part 1.
Well,
I thought Dune Part 2 was much more entertaining.
Because, yeah, again, I really can't speak with too much credibility on this because I haven't read the book, don't really engage with sci-fi content. I've watched all the Star Wars movies. That's about the extent of it. But when I watched Dune, the first one, I went with a friend who does engage with sci-fi stuff. And even he was like, what did we just watch?
Who was the friend?
Liam.
Oh!
Yeah. And we were kind of like, that was nothing. I don't know, it wasn't bad. Like, Timothée Chalamet rocked his socks off, but...
Yeah, no, I agree. I feel like it was
good.
that... Yeah, I don't know. As someone who hasn't read that book, but I have a lot of friends... I have some friends who have, and they all... And asking them if they liked it, they all scared me off reading it. It's a difficult book to read, and at times a difficult movie to watch too. Yeah. I think this is really one of those stories that is just... It's for the people. If you're into it, you're really into it, and you love it. But if you can't really get on board, you're probably going to struggle.
Anyway, back on Hunger Games.
Oh yes, that's what we were talking about.
Yes. Do you have anything else to add about the adaptation? Because I really don't have much say in this. Like I said, I was super disengaged from the whole YA dystopian central. I was too busy reading John Green, like the early Sally Rooney trainee I was. So I don't really have much emotional attachment to this book, but I know a lot of people do in the similar way that they do to Harry Potter.
Yeah, I would probably argue that this one isn't maybe as culturally significant as something like Harry. I feel like Harry Potter, or maybe it's the fans of Harry Potter are a lot more intense than the fans of the Hunger Games.
And also this targeted a smaller demographic. Harry Potter targeted the masses.
That is true.
This one was just YA, like it was a small group.
I'll say from a construction or from a filmmaking standpoint, I think it's casted near perfectly. As far as like pretty much pre-fame, Jennifer Lawrence's Katniss was a great find for them. Josh Hutcherson, all I'd seen him in before that is Zathura, maybe a couple of other... Kicking and Screaming as well, if anyone's watched that. It's a very good Will Ferrell comedy movie that young, like 7-8-year-old Josh Hutcherson's in.
Oh, right.
Woody Harrelson is in it as Haymitch, who is the best character.
Is Elizabeth Banks in it?
Elizabeth Banks is in it as Effie Trinket. Yeah. And rest in peace, Donald Sutherland, who sadly departed us 4 or 5 months ago, as President Snow, one of the great actors of the 80s and 90s. So perfectly cast, very well done. You can definitely see that the directors change as the movies went on. Okay. I would compare it to, and I can't believe I'm about to say this, how 50 Shades of Grey, the movie adaptation of 50 Shades of Grey changed as time went on.
See, I can't contribute. I haven't watched or read that.
I haven't read them, but I've watched the first 2, and it was a bit of a contention because the first one, they went to a big effort to make it a bit more artsy, and it was directed by a woman, and it was written by a woman, and the actors were both much more on board.
Isn't it written by Sam Taylor Johnson?
The movie.
Yeah.
The first movie is.
Yeah.
Then the first movie, the author, E.L. James, which is an alien, hated it because they changed it all and she didn't like it. So then the next 2 are written and directed by her husband.
Oh.
So if you ever watch them, you definitely notice a very key difference in the way those films are made. And the way they're exploring a lot of themes in those books definitely changes, leaning towards, I would argue, something a little bit more that I'm not super comfortable with watching. There's better movies to watch if you want. If you want to scratch your erotic thriller itch, watch Basic Instinct. It's much more entertaining.
Or Magic Mike.
Or Magic Mike.
What's Magic Mike?
Magic Mike. First, Magic Mike is fantastic.
It's actually really good.
It is fantastic. It is a great movie.
Go Channing. Also, I'm a Channing Tatum lover. He's having his resurgence right now as little cameos. Good for him. Yeah. Okay, well, if you're not sick of us talking about book to films yet, now we want to discuss some of our favourite book to film adaptations that we have a real emotional attachment to. So, if you've listened to the pod, you'll know that Gone Girl by Gillian Flynn is one of my favourite books. I think it's fantastic. I think Gillian Flynn is fantastic. Now, it has been adapted into a movie. It was written in 2012, and only 2 years later was it adapted into a movie by the one and only David Fincher. And I think that turnaround is pretty impressive. I think it just shows the massive impact that the book had for it to be turned into a movie again so quickly. Now, I actually watched the movie several times before I read the book. I only read the book in the past 2 years, I think. And it is fantastic. It's so good. And I've since read a lot more Gillian Flynn. Sharp Objects is amazing. It's also been turned into a TV show. Great TV show. It's really eerie. Super, super eerie. But anyway, on the Gone Girl topic, I think watching the movie before the book, I kind of think I went into the book... When you do watch a movie before a book, you go into the book with a visualized picture already of what you're about to read. And I was a bit worried that I would read this book and be bored because I already knew what was happening, what I'd see, etc. But I actually read the book, and as any good writer does, they enhance everything. Like, they make it so much more intricate and detailed, and the suspense was just so heightened in the book. That's not to say that the movie version was bad either. It's just the way that a book can get you deeper in different ways than a short movie can, like we were saying before. So, in summary of what I'm trying to say is the book, so intricate, detailed, the suspense they're able to create throughout the writing is amazing. And then the movie, the cast, perfection.
Fantastic.
Fantastic.
There is a alternate universe where the main two characters, who are played by Ben Affleck and Rosamund Pike in fine form.
Oh, yeah.
Absolutely brilliant form. Were played by John Hamm and Reese Witherspoon. And I don't know if that's a movie I would have watched.
I love Reese Witherspoon, but I just don't think she could have played that type of character. Rosamund Pike was the perfect fit. The perfect fit. Like, the way she played the cool girl monologue, it's just so good. And I think, that's a particular thing that translated really well into the movie for me, was the cool girl monologue. If you've ever watched it, she is on the run, she's in a roadside pit stop bathroom, shaving her hair and dyeing her hair and shaving and changing her appearance, and at the same time she's doing this monologue about how she changed herself for her partner that she's run away from to try and be a cool girl. She shaves, she drinks beers, she does this, and...
Well, it eats cheeseburgers but still maintains a size 2. That one really rung out to me. I remember thinking about that.
It's perfect, and it's so fitting even today, like 14 years later. Yeah, it's truly fantastic. And even... there is a scene, I don't want to spoil it in case you haven't read or watched it, but I mean, come on, guys. Why haven't you read or watched it? But there's a scene in there where someone's throat gets slit. And I think for a movie that's not horror, gory in any other form, it's actually done in a way that doesn't make you want to vomit. It kind of fits in with a movie that's not otherwise horror. Does that make sense?
It feels like the natural progression and the climax of where Amy's been going.
But at the same time, they don't shy away from the gore and the gross and the how harsh the scene is. But it's just done so well, and I think that's also credit to David Fincher. I think he's great.
Also, it's worth noting for this, Gillian Flynn wrote the screenplay.
Yeah, and I think that's a really key thing to me. Well, I don't think it's essential, but I think when I do hear that a book is being adapted into a film, and I know that the author is either a producer or they wrote the screenplay or they have a really heavy hand in it, especially if they wrote the screenplay, it's probably going to be pretty good.
Yeah, I feel like one of the big red flags of book to movie adaptations is when the author is just on as an executive producer, which basically all that means is that they've been given some money to give the studio permission to make the movie, and they maybe have no interaction with them outside of that. If you ever see that the author is only an executive producer,
doesn't say much.
Legally, they have to be.
Yeah, for it to get made.
Yeah.
Lou, do you want to talk about one of your favourites?
Yes, I would. Thank you for asking, Lauren. I appreciate it. I was going to talk about Fantastic Mr. Fox, which is a classic book, one of the first. When I was born, my parents were given a bunch of different Roald Dahl books. So it was that kind of classic gift that you give to a new parent when it's like, here are some books, and Roald Dahl's great because he's got stuff from appropriate for kids when they're 6 and to kids when they're 14, 15. Historically, the Roald Dahl estate have been very cagey about movie adaptations. They don't like to let movie adaptations be made of their work. His wife, who has the rights or the ownership over all of his properties, will not allow movies to be made of himself unless she really believes in it.
And that says a lot.
And I think that's great to protect his legacy.
Yeah.
But everyone knows when Wes Anderson comes a-knocking, you've got something to think about. And this movie could have easily been something that was just a by-the-books adaptation, a computer-animated kind of thing. Could have been pretty cool.
But also, 2010. So I think it's good that it was made in 2010. For
Yeah.
that exact reason that tech hadn't taken over yet.
Yeah. It's all stop motion. If you watch any behind-the-scenes stuff, it was a painstaking movie to create. At the time, it was the longest stop-motion movie that had ever been made. Worth it, exactly. All of the models are great. The voice cast is stacked. It is every Wes Anderson actor you know. Bill Murray, George Clooney, Meryl Streep, Owen Wilson.
It's stacked, though.
It's stacked.
It's stacked.
Look up the IMDb and you'll see at least
You'll know
7
everyone.
actors who you know. It's funny. It's heartwarming. I've watched this movie probably 7 times in my life just because it's such an easy watching. It always makes me laugh. I think it's so witty in the way that it's written. And also, in some ways, I think this is one of those few movie adaptations that may even be better than the original source material, because the book is thin and it's small. It's a very simple story about a fox father trying to provide for his family, and then he gets in too deep, and then he has to use his friends and his relationships to get out of it. But what Wes Anderson is able to bring to it, the sense of style all the characters are wearing, and the way the movie is made, and the way it's written, the way they all talk to each other is so funny and clever. And Wes Anderson's love of wordplay in the script is so
funny.
Yeah, I could talk about this for another hour and a half if I wanted to. I just think it's fantastic.
I think Wes Anderson was the best person ever to direct this movie because, like you said, he's working with nothing, and I think he has such a creative brain. You know, there's a lot of criticisms about Wes Anderson, but he is one of my favourite directors. And yeah, I think he didn't create something from nothing. That's not to discredit Roald Dahl, but he created something from a very little story.
He made it into something greater than what it could have been.
Yes.
It could have been something really simple and not boring, but something that wouldn't have had the same staying power as this movie has had.
Do you think that the movie adaptation built up the book's reputation?
I'm not sure. That's
either.
A good question.
It's hard because the book was written in the 70s and we obviously weren't born yet, and the adaptation wasn't until 2010. So I'm possibly thinking that maybe it just gave it that resurgence, and maybe it gave it a new audience.
And Roald Dahl has so many other, for lack of a better phrase, more famous stories.
Was he the Witches?
He was the Witches.
The movie adaptation of the Witches is questionable, but
I don't think I've watched that one.
It's odd. Anyway, is he James and the Giant Peach?
James and the Giant Peach, Charlie and the Chocolate Factory,
The
Twits, all these kind of great classic stories, but a lot of them are quite short and quite little.
Yeah.
Matilda, what am I talking about?
Matilda.
Another great example of a fantastic movie to book to movie adaptation.
I think a better way of phrasing it is turning really short stories that are great for what they are into something massive and bigger than whatever could be possible.
And that is a really great way of making a movie adaptation. Is there's two basic trains of thought. Can I create something great out of something that's already great, or can I take something that I can really use as a baseline to make something new and different, like Jojo Rabbit? By Taika Waititi loves doing this. Hunt for the Wilder People is based on a short story. Jojo Rabbit was based on a book called Caging Skies. Now, Caging Skies is a pretty intense and gnarly book, but Taika took the basic idea of a young boy in the Nazi youth finds a German girl hiding in the walls of his house, and then converted that central idea into something else.
And sometimes I think that can be the best way to adapt an idea based off a short story.
Yeah.
Is because then that way it's not just play for play. You know, you've already had the story, now you're just getting a visual version of the story. You're getting this idea that was fantastic in the format that was in, and now it's evolving into something new and different that's specific to that director's idea. So it's like you are getting two different stories in a sense, because it's done so differently. And I think that's kind of cool.
Yeah, I agree. I think that's really cool. Yeah, especially with the adaptation of the short stories thing and being able to bring more chutzpah to a great story already.
Okay, and the last book that I want to talk about today is The Dry by Jane Harper. So she's an Australian author. She's amazing. She's wonderful. She writes mystery crime novels. And The Dry, I believe, was her first book. I could be wrong, but it's her first book that was then turned into a movie. So she wrote it in 2016, and then in 2020, so 4 years later, which again is still a pretty quick turnaround, it was adapted into a movie directed by Robert Connolly. Now,
Great Australian director.
Yes, he's a great Australian director. And it is starring Eric the Dilf Banner as...
Oh, he looks fine in these movies, my goodness. Eric Bana has never looked better.
And also because of his character as well, he plays the noble, good, saintly
handsome,
person.
Capable...
Rugged,
grizzly. I need to... Oh, okay, I need to...
Sit down.
Okay, sorry. Yeah, okay. Will you watch The Dry tonight?
Not if you're going to act like this.
Okay, I'll stop.
Okay. So, the book I really enjoyed. I think I don't really read too much crime that often, but this definitely got me into wanting to read more crime. I've since read all of Jane Harper's books, and yeah, I kind of want to get into some more crime, besides her and Gillian Flynn. They're the only really crime mystery authors that I've read. So it makes me really want to read more. I say that, but I haven't read more. But the book is really good, and it's difficult because it is kind of a tragic story. There's lots of murder and death in the story of innocent people. So they do a really good job at helping you empathize with these people that actually died before the book began. And does that make sense? Do you know what I'm trying to say?
The characters who are already... By the time Aaron arrives Eric Banner's character's name is Aaron Falk.
Yeah.
When Aaron arrives at this childhood town,
which is the beginning of
the book, the movie does a very good job of very quickly establishing his relationship with some of the people who have died, and also creating a sense of understanding of maybe not everything in this town is necessarily as it seems, and because of that, then you start to maybe buy into Aaron's attitude of, oh, maybe what I've been told hasn't happened. If I'm speaking very vaguely, it's because this is obviously a mystery
and we don't want to spoil
and a mystery
it.
movie. Any information I give you really outside of the first 15, 20 minutes would have a bit of an impact on whether or not you guys can enjoy it. But it is absolutely a great watch and a great Australian movie too.
Yeah, I will say the fact that it's Australian, I think Jane Harper does really well in the novel is you can picture the Australian outback that she's talking about. Even if you haven't been to the areas that she's talking of, you can picture it so vividly. The sunrises, the sunsets, the trees, the bottom brushes, the sound of the animals, like you can picture it so well. Even the roads of the streets, like everything you can picture really well. And then when I watched the movie, I was like, this is exactly what I pictured, and that's so awesome to see. And I think going off the dry, but another one of Jane Harper's books, Exiles, it's her second novel, I will say I didn't love the book as much. I felt as though maybe, but it hasn't been adapted into a movie.
True. It's the only one of the three that hasn't been adapted yet.
The third one has, what's it called?
Force of Nature. Force of Nature came out last year.
And the movie was great.
Fantastic.
I think I would be interested to see Exiles adapted into a movie, but if it was, I would hope they put some more life in it. And it's difficult because writing a mystery novel would actually be very challenging, and I want to give her credit for that. I think in the second one, the mystery is the core component, and you kind of tend to lose track of some of the characters in there. Like, I feel like I'm not as connected to the characters as what it was in the dry. But it's still really fantastic, and if they did make a movie adaptation of Exiles, I would definitely watch it.
Well, so far there's been 2 movie adaptations of 2 of those books, and they've both been really good. Fantastic. Also, just from my perspective, shout out to our family friend Annie, who did the sound on the original dry. She was there on location in rural Victoria.
Go Annie, that's awesome. Okay, that's all from me, and now Lewis wants to talk about
the best book to movie adaptation. Now, this isn't even a question. This is the best adaptation of a book to a movie. It is the idea of taking a short story, creating it into something that is bigger. It's thought-provoking. It's got deeper messages and themes. It's got Oscar award-winning performances in it. It is everyone is firing on all cylinders, and it is, of course, the 2006 classic Cat in the Hat, starring Mike Myers. This movie is fantastic. For anyone who hasn't watched it, it is an acid trip on film. It is all this movie is. Now, considering this book has pretty much a grand total, but I think there's under 200 words in the original Cat in the Hat book.
It's a graphic novel?
I'd say a picture book.
A picture book,
I'd probably say, yeah.
A graphic novel is the wanky version of
I think graphic novel is what guys call comics who still want to have sex on the first date. Edit that out. I'm doing another joke. Graphic novels is graphic novels is what guys call comics when they want to impress girls on the first date.
I'm glad you didn't try that one.
No, I do, yeah. Nah, I'm not a graphic novels guy. I just call them comics like a real man.
Okay.
No, but Cat in the Hat is fantastic. I think genuinely, now I've watched this many times in my life. It was a formative movie that was quoted endlessly in my household. My mum will still quote the cupcake and eater to me, and also that entire sketch when they're doing a cooking show when they're making the cupcakes, and then he brings his lawyers in. It's this weird. It's honestly, if you haven't watched the movie and you've only read the book, I guarantee you can go and watch the movie and have no idea what's going to happen.
Surely everyone's watched the movie.
I really hope everyone has watched the movie, because otherwise people are going to think I'm crazy.
No, it's like an iconic childhood movie.
It's great, and Mike Myers is buried under makeup as the Cat in the Hat. He's doing something. I don't know what kind of character he's trying to play.
You know what I think? You know how Cats the movie got so much hate?
Yeah.
I think it's because it could never be Cat in the Hat.
No, it's nowhere near self-aware enough to ever be Cat in the Hat.
No.
That's why I think Cat in the Hat is really powerful.
It's silly. It's purposefully silly.
I've always been really a big believer in almost any comedy movie can get away with anything as long as it's being self-aware. If it knows that it's being ridiculous, it can really get away with anything that's ridiculous. If you look at things like Bill and Ted, some of my favourite comedies of all time, or the 21 and 22 Jump Street movies, which I still think are genuinely quite funny when you rewatch them. Especially that second one, there's some really great meta humour in there too.
Hey, another Channing shout out.
Another Channing shout out. God, he's getting all the shout outs. We'll just turn this into a Channing podcast next.
That's fine, a Channing fan account.
So I'll have Eric, you can have Channing.
Okay.
Our friends are going to listen to this. What was I saying? Oh, 22 Jump Street, there's some great meta humour in there too. If a movie's not taking itself that seriously, there's a scene where the Cat in the Hat is actively discussing litigating these two 11-year-old children because he's chopped off a part of his tail by accident, and there's a team of lawyers standing behind him. This movie is ridiculous. Check it out. Also found out that the kid who played the son, who was his...
So, Spencer Breslin used to be married to Grace Tame, who won Australian of the Year a couple of years ago, who is now an advocate against sexual violence for autism. She is an amazing, amazing Australian woman, and me talking about this divorce and marriage is no discredit to the work she's done. It's just a really interesting fun fact.
Is this a crazy little bit of lore?
It's a crazy bit of trivia for you that Grace Tame used to be married to Spencer Breslin, who was the child in the Cat in the Hat movie.
Yeah, so if that pops up on a trivia night, you can thank us later.
Do we have anything more to add?
Oh, yes. I have a surprise question for Lauren. It's time for our special round, Lewis's surprise round.
Okay, this actually is a surprise round. It's news to me.
Okay, I have a question.
Okay.
What's one book you've read that you really love that hasn't been made into a movie that you think would be a really good adaptation to pick?
Fantastic question. Can I give an option and then a special mention?
Absolutely.
So, my special mention first. So, Craig Silvey, we all know him. Boy Spoilers Universe turned into a TV show.
Craig Silvey? Are you talking about Trent Downton or Craig Silvey?
Oh, sorry. That's what I meant. Restart.
Yeah. Actually, no, don't edit this out. We just appreciate Lewis has corrected something for Lauren that was book-related. Thank you. Winning. This is my podcast now.
Oh, my God. Okay. I meant Trent Dalton. So, Trent Dalton, Boy Spoilers Universe was turned into a TV show. And I think, it does happen a lot. When it happens with one of their books, it happens with a lot of them. I don't think that's a bad thing. I think sometimes people do write books that are naturally good to be turned into film and movies. So I think Boy Spoilers Universe turned into a TV. Lola in the Mirror was another book of his latest book, which I recently read. Fantastic. I think I actually liked it a lot more than Boy Spoilers Universe, and I think that's because it wasn't such a love letter to the Courier Mail.
Nice.
But also, Boy Spoilers Universe, I think I gave 3 or 4 stars. Lola in the Mirror, I gave 5. I really liked it.
Wow.
And I think it would make for a really good movie. I'm a sucker for movies set in Brisbane. It's so rare. And I think that would be awesome.
How many do we have? 1?
Nil. Not many.
Yeah.
Not many at all. And I just think that would be really cool. But the book I actually think, and this one's probably a bit more niche, which is why I want to talk about it, is Blue Sisters by Coco Malors. So Coco Malors, I believe she's written 2 books now, Blue Sisters and her other more popular book called Cleopatra and Frankenstein. I haven't read it yet, but it's definitely on my to-read list after reading Blue Sisters. Now, the story is beautiful. It's about 3 sisters who are grieving the loss of their other sister who recently passed away from an overdose. And basically each chapter is from a different perspective of the 3 sisters as they're going through the year after, during this grieving process. And it's just really beautiful insight into their lives and how different they are and how they're trying to do the best for everyone but themselves. And it's just, complicated in layers. And I think it would make for a really interesting and vivid movie because it would just be really engaging seeing the different locations that they're in. One sister's in Paris, one's in LA, the other's in London. And I just think it would be a really cool contrast. And I think there's a lot of life in that story that would be really translated well into screen.
Do you think that it would make a better movie, or do you think it would be better suited to being, say, a TV show?
I think this one would actually make for a good movie.
Nice.
I think it doesn't need to be dragged out longer than it needs to be. I think it could, but it's one of those it doesn't need to be. I think it would make for a really lovely movie. But also, again, I like Reese Witherspoon, but I feel like I don't really want her to get her hands on this one because she can be pretty hit and miss with sometimes watering down stories. For example, Where the Crawdads Sing, I think that was so watered down. And also that AI bird in the first scene was tragic, but that's not her fault. I think for a director that got their hands on this, I can't think of anyone off the top of my head, but, Emerald Fennell.
Oh, interesting.
I think it would be different to what she's currently doing. She is going a bit more the wackier kind of way, but I think if she got her hands on this, she could make it into a really cool feminist kind of piece. But I don't know if she's perfect for this.
From everything you've described to me about what this book is, I think a good director I would recommend personally is someone who it would be Greta Lee, who recently directed Past Lives, if anybody watched that, which is fantastic. I cried 3 times.
Actually, Greta Gerwig would be much better than Emerald Fennell for this. I think Greta Gerwig or Greta Lee. I need to watch Past Lives. That's on my list to watch. Yes, thank you for that input. Greta Gerwig or Greta Lee would be fantastic for adapting this.
Excellent.
And I want to give it a shout out. I know we have a small podcast here, but if for any reason that we get some platform here, I hope that I sway this decision, because I would watch the hell out of that movie.
I'll buy the rights for your birthday next year.
Would you?
I think it'll be expensive, but I'll start saving now.
Okay, now Lewis, I want to ask you the same question. Do you have a book that you think that hasn't been adapted that you think should?
I have 2. From the greatest author of all time, Matthew Riley. So for those of us who don't know, Matthew Riley is basically modern day Shakespeare. No, he's not. He's an Australian author. He makes very fun, easy reading, kind of actiony kind of
I've read
books,
The Tournament, which you told me to read.
Which is actually going to be the one I'm going to talk about.
There you go.
So that's one of my 2. So my 2 is there's one called The Great Zoo of China, which would be a cool kind of Jurassic Parky kind of actiony fun movie. I think it'd be really cool. I won't spoil for you guys what's in the zoo in case anybody's interested in reading it, but it's a very, very cool concept. But The Tournament would be mine. So The Tournament's basic kind of synopsis is that there is the Sultan of Brunei, who was at a time I think still technically was the richest man in history. Brings in a bunch of these 16 great chess players from all over the world to come and compete in a chess tournament in Constantinople. Now stay with me, it's not about the chess tournament. But what happens at this chess tournament is that people randomly start dying. Now the English champion, the English chess player, has brought with him his friend who is a tutor to a young Queen Elizabeth I, who is also present, and the whole book is told from her perspective. She's 8 years old, it's all told from the perspective of a young Queen Elizabeth.
I think is key. That's what helps you really get engaged.
Yeah, it gets really into it. And she's viewing all this stuff for the first time. She's been a very sheltered young princess, and she's kind of been able to be brought...
I think she's naive in a good way.
Naive and sheltered, as you would be if you were kind of being hidden away from the rest of the world as a princess. And this is her first opportunity to get out into the world, and she discovers a lot about the world and about different cultures. But more specifically, people start dying at this chess tournament, and Leonardo da Vinci recommends this tutor to be the pseudo detective who tries to figure out what happens. And then it's this big sporting event with this chess tournament while they're also trying to figure out who's murdering these people. There's a big kind of conspiracy and murder plot that kind of runs through the whole book. It'd be very interesting. I think it would probably make a better TV show, though, personally.
Yeah, I was going to say, I think it would play out really well, especially with the recent release of Gladiator 2.
Yeah.
Because this is kind of a similar kind of vibe. Do you agree?
Yeah, I would say so. I'd definitely say in optics, yeah, for sure. It's less swords and sandals and less fighty. This is probably why I think it's more interesting. It's less pure action oriented than his other work, and it's more grounded. The characters all feel more real. They're not like these kind of He-Man action hero types. The main guy is this kind of quite dweeby, nerdy teacher guy. Maybe that's why I like that book so much, is because he reminds me of myself a bit.
I agree with you, though. I think it would make a better TV series because it would add some suspense. You know, when the episode ends, it's like, oh my god, what's going to happen next? Because the book gives you that. Yeah. I actually struggled to put it down, which shocked me because not my type of thing.
It's a bit Game of Thronesy too. There's some there's some warring royal families. There's some sexy stuff that goes on as well, which kind of goes in a direction you may not necessarily be expecting, which then kind of becomes its own learning experience for some of the characters in it.
That was a great question. Thank you so much for asking that.
It's my pleasure.
Well, I think that's all we have for today, but now it is time for us to announce the December book club read. Now, we have been a bit slack lately, just as you know, we haven't really released an episode in a couple months, just life, travel, everything. So we're getting back onto the book club reads, and we will be doing Little Women by Louisa May Alcott. This is continuing on the theme of book-to-movie adaptations. Now, Little Women has been adapted into several movies. Probably the most notable and recent one is the one by Greta Gerwig in 2019. With
great movie.
Stacked cast. It's awesome. Like Florence Pugh, Emma Watson, Saoirse Ronan,
Timothée Chalamet.
Who's the mum?
Isn't Meryl in it too? Meryl Streep, isn't she?
I think she's in the other one.
No, Meryl Streep's the grandma.
Oh, she's the grandma. Who's the mum?
Laura Dern.
Laura Dern is it.
And Bob Odenkirk's in it too. Saul Goodman from Better Call Saul.
Yes.
He's his dad.
He is. It's fantastic. And I haven't watched this one, but there's another adaptation, which is probably the other most known one from 94, starring the one and only Winona Ryder, Claire Danes, Kirsten Dunst.
Wait, what? I didn't know this was a movie.
Yeah.
Oh, I need to watch this.
Christian Bale, Susan Sarandon, like, it's stacked.
Oh my god!
I haven't watched it either, but I need to watch it. Like, it's a stacked cast from, it's amazing. This is our December book club read. We really hope you want to read along with us. I think a lot of people might have read it because it is a classic at the end of the day, but I actually haven't read it, which I'm kind of disgusted at myself for.
That's a bit harsh.
Yeah, I know. I haven't read a lot of classics. But yeah, even if you haven't read it, you've probably seen a movie and you know a lot about the story. But yeah, essentially, Meg, Joe, Amy, and Beth, they're the 4 little women, well, sisters, enduring hardships of the time. It was the Civil War. And it's a simple tale because it was kind of a simple time, I guess. It's a feminist piece. It's Louise May Alcott. It's a feminist literature on, gender roles at the time, especially women's role at the time, and Jo is my favourite character.
So what happens when you push back on that too,
Yeah.
as a woman in that time? Like, what happens when you start pushing back against those norms?
Which
And how
I
does
think-
society push you?
Which is, I think, why Jo's my favourite character,
Yeah.
because she does that the most. And so I'm really excited to read it, to see it in book form. It's fantastic. Like, it's such a well-known classic. And we hope you want to read along. So anyway, thank you so much for listening today. And thank you, Lewis, for joining. It was so fun to have
Thank
a
you so much
special
for having me.
This is delightful.
Yeah, we're about to bring another guest on at some point.
Yeah, we will. I don't really know who yet. So if anyone else wants to be a special guest, please.
Maybe Greta Gerwig. Tune into the Capsule podcast next week with Lauren and special guest Greta Gerwig, which is definitely happening. And if it's not going to happen, I want you guys to tell her in the comments that you're very disappointed.
Yeah, comment on, does Greta Gerwig even have its social media? I don't know.
I don't know,
But,
probably not. Busy with the Narnia remake.
That would be dream guest on my podcast. Would be Greta Gerwig.
4 celebrities living or dead you'd like to have on your podcast.
Anyway, thank you so much,
Thanks, guys.
We'll catch you next episode. Read up, bitches.
Read up, bitches. Hell yeah.